is that Citizens United
Mm.
actually changed the ability of Israel's lobby to influence policymakers. And it happened at a time when there already was a gradual decrease in grassroots support for Israel's right-wing policies. And that gets backfilled starting
Hey everyone, my former colleague Eli Clifton, co-author of Freedom Incorporated: The Roots of the Islamophobia Network in America, which we co-wrote with Matt Duss and others at Center for American Progress, is now a co-founder of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. If that sounds familiar, is because it was also co-founded by Trita Parsi, friend of the show who we've had on several times the past 2 weeks. The man hasn't slept, talking about all the successes that the United States and the Trump administration has had with Iran. I mean, it's going so well. Strait of Hormuz is completely open. Gas prices have gone down. Our allies have responded to the call. Everyone's joining for regime change in Iran. Civilian casualties are to a minimum. Lebanon's doing fine. The Dubai airport's great. I kid. No, it's a hellscape. And Eli has a great new piece out in The Nation: How the Israeli Tail Wags the American Dog. The U.S. attack on Iran may less be about American security than about the priorities of Israel's government, which means Eli Clifton is anti-Semitic. Oh, but he's also Jewish, so we're going to get into that. Eli, can you shamelessly promote yourself and also your book that's coming out in a couple of months?
Thanks so much. We'll get to the article in a moment, but I want to broadly sort of plug my book and my area of focus in my journalism and research for many years, which has been sort of the intersection of U.S. foreign policy and money and politics. And I think this is clearly coming to a head. We couldn't have planned the timing. We thought this was going to be a relevant issue about the role of Israel in our in our elections, in our democracy. But it seems like it has become ever more so. We thought the past presidential election, would be sort of the high point of that. I think we may be hitting new highs coming into the midterms. But to get kind of directly to,
Well, let me
yeah,
promote the book.
the book.
Clearly,
That's right.
you're not good at this,
I'm
and
not
I
good at
wasn't
this.
good
I'm
at
just
this.
getting started with it.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
America in the Grip of a Foreign Power: Israel's Lobby
that's
by
right.
Eli Clifton and Ian Lustick, coming out in the summer, published by Simon and Schuster. And I'm going to put the link right now. Continue, Eli.
Thank you. Thank you for getting me on track here, because I'm just getting used to this. My co-author is phenomenal. He's a professor emeritus at the University of Pennsylvania, a real expert on international relations and on the U.S. Israel relationship. And the core thesis of our book is that the nature of this relationship has become more dangerous for the United States than it has in the past. It is imposing new financial costs on Americans, but also some other costs that are less visible. It's coming in the form of security costs. It's also coming in the form of costs to our liberties here at home. And we sort of peg it to three major changes that have occurred over the past several decades. The first is a big one: the end of the Cold War. It took the guardrails off of American presidents and off of policymakers, where previously Israel and its lobby had sometimes pushed the United States to engage in policies that may have been, certainly in contributing to conflicts in the region. And usually that was the one thing that permitted American presidents to push back, is to say, "Hey, wait a minute. If this brings us more close to a direct confrontation with the Soviet Union, we're not going to do it." The second big change is Israel's increasing rightward shift, the end of really the opportunity for the two-state solution, the death of the Oslo Accords, and all of that sort of leads directly into the global war on terror, into 9/11, and you get sort of a more militaristic U.S. foreign policy alongside an set of Israeli policies that are pretty much dead set against the possibility of a two-state solution, even though that sort of zombie peace process continues to live rent-free, or, for you might say, a very high price, in the heads of American policymakers for the next couple decades. The third change, and the one that I think is the most interesting in terms of my own work, and the one I feel very passionately about, is that Citizens United
Mm.
actually changed the ability of Israel's lobby to influence policymakers. And it happened at a time when there already was a gradual decrease in grassroots support for Israel's right wing policies. And that gets backfilled starting right after actually Walter Mearsheimer's famous book, The Israel Lobby,
That
and
yeah, the
with
famous
Citizens
Mearsheimer
United.
Waltz book that came out almost, what, 20 years ago?
Exactly. Right before Citizens United. And they said, hey, there's actually declining support. Maybe we're going to get a more sane set of policies going forward. Now, they were right that that support was diminishing, but what they did not anticipate, and there was no way they could, was that the means that the lobby would have in order to hold on to its control of politicians and its ability to push unpopular policies was going to be transformed. And with Citizens United, it opened the floodgates. And the big concern with Citizens United, and I'm sure you remember it as well as I do, is that this was going to open the floodgates of corporate money into the American political system,
Which it did.
which it did, but perhaps not to the degree that we had feared that it would, and that that would become the leading source of influence in our democracy. When you look at the biggest donors in our campaigns, they are individuals, they are billionaires. They are people who, when you start to look at what their interests are, they do have some business interests. But they are very explicit in many cases about their interest in supporting Israel and supporting Israel's right-wing government and in ensuring that there is no daylight between the United States and Israel. And this handful of donors, and they're active across both parties, slightly more active in the Republican Party, but the Democratic Party shouldn't get off the hook for their dependency on these donors as well, are able to instill a degree of discipline within both parties that prevents either party from shifting from the status quo on these policies, even as the respective bases on both the right and the left are drifting away from it. And that creates a moment both of opportunity, but also enormous danger. Because the levers of influence that the lobby now uses in order to shut down opposition, curtail debate, now extend to trying to criminalize speech on campuses, and try to shut down debate rather than to engage in it or to win arguments. And that extends even into the sort of backward ways that the lobby engages with elections now. Now, there's a lot of talk about AIPAC spending in individual races. And it's really interesting to see what are the candidates they pick, how are they choosing to play this game. But there's one really consistent quality about it when their super PAC is called the United Democracy Project. When it runs ads for or
United
against a
Democracy
candidate,
Project.
yeah,
Elect
when they run ads,
elect Chicago women.
but it doesn't matter if they're opposing a candidate, supporting a candidate. There's one issue that they will not talk about: Israel, because they know it's a loser of an issue. They know it's not going to move votes in the way they want to move votes, and they talk about the issues that probably are of high salience for voters. They sometimes contradict themselves because they were famous for running for promoting a candidate many years ago who had been very active in trying to oppose the January 6 riots, while they were also backing a candidate who had been very supportive of the efforts to overturn the election. So they're happy to be contradictory about how they're backing people and what they're saying. They purely care about the outcome of the races, and they know that their singular issue is one that they cannot use to try to move votes one way or the other.
There's so much to talk about. I want to take the DeLorean back and then we'll move forward because
Mhm.
what's common to us isn't common to most folks. And now people are finally kind of waking up to the pernicious influence of these billionaires and pro Israel lobbyists, how it's influencing not just Republicans, but also Democrats and influencing policy. We just saw this amazing poll. I say amazing because I never thought I'd see this in my lifetime, where a majority of Americans are now pro Palestinian, where Israel in the last 2.5 years has lost double digit support from both Democrats and independents. Eli, we've been around for a while. We never thought we'd see that in our lifetime. I mean, that is an absolute remarkable shift, folks. But let's take it back to Mearsheimer and Waltz's book. They wrote this book called The Israel Lobby, where they said there is this lobby APAC and others, but it's not just APAC. It's a collection of donors and influencers and people who are pro-Israel who are using their immense wealth and money to influence both sides in pursuing what is dangerous, both domestic and international policy. Mearsheimer and Walls took a lot of hits for that book. They were called anti-Semitic. They said this plays into anti-Semitic tropes about Jewish power. And they said, you know what? APAC is simply doing what other PACs do. NRA does this. Why only focus on the Jews? And by the way, America would never, ever, ever follow Israel. It would never be wagged by Israel. It believes that supporting Israel is in its interest. So when you say, Waj, Netanyahu dog walked Trump, that's also anti-Semitic because Trump chose to do this. You have seen this, you've seen these arguments for the last 20 years, and yet you still decided to write this book. Your response to that critique, which I know will come after you and your co-author as well.
I mean, I think the first and most important point to make in response to the notion that this is about all Jews or about that we are writing about Jews is to say that to make that argument is actually to buy into an anti-Semitic trope. And it's one that groups like Jonathan Greenblatt at the ADL are more than happy
Just a
to
couple of days ago, you
reinforce.
mean?
Yes. They're more than happy to engage with that and to repeat that trope. But it is a trope and it is a lie. And it's really important to point that out. Jewish voters, when you poll them, and this gets done around every election pretty much, but in the last general election, it's been very, very consistent, the polling on Jewish voters. The majority of them, excuse me, do hold pro-Israel sentiments. Also, Israel as an issue that they vote on is ridiculously low salience. It doesn't move votes for Jewish voters. So that's an important point to make, that Jewish voters are not a pro-Israel voting bloc. That is a lie. And the people who want to tell you that that is the case are trying to make you believe that Judaism and Zionism and Jews and Israel are synonymous, because that's important for them to try to further their agenda.
That's
But
literally,
it is
folks,
a
what
dangerous
ADL
one because
Jonathan. Sorry,
it cuts
well, I,
the
I just want to say that's literally what Jonathan Greenblatt of the ADL said on
right.
CNN a couple of
Yeah.
days ago.
And to be very clear, Jonathan Greenblatt is essentially repeating the dual loyalty trope. That Jews, are inherently loyal to Israel because there's something about our religion, about our culture, about our history that makes us always loyal to this foreign country, to be clear. The United States and Israel are not synonymous. They are two independent countries. And that is, again, not reflected in how Jewish Americans vote at all. There's another lie which is built into this, which is that the Republican Party has become more pro-Israel over time. And the Democratic Party, you could argue, has sort of stayed roughly the same or become slightly more pro-Israel. But there's another myth there, which is that Jews, as the Republican Party has become more pro-Israel, have started to swing to vote more Republican. That is also a lie. If you look at polling on pretty much every ethno-religious group, Jews are one of the most consistent groups who vote roughly by the same proportions for the Democratic Party versus Republicans. That's not to say there aren't Jewish Republicans, but the numbers don't change that much. So to be clear, there is no Jewish swing vote, and there is no evidence that Jews are voting based off of an allegiance to Israel. Those are both tropes, and I would argue those are anti-Semitic tropes to be promoting. And that is largely where a lot of the attacks on Walt and Mearsheimer come from, which is to say that if you attack the lobby, if you say the lobby, the Israel lobby, again, a foreign country's lobby, is somehow detrimental to the United States, you are attacking all Jewish Americans. It's demonstrably false, and it's a dangerous claim to make, to be very clear. So I think that it's important we lay that out. Now, when we do talk about Israel's lobby and who these donors are, they are indeed mostly Jewish, but it is a small handful and they talk about how they openly prioritize Israel. Jewish donors like Sheldon and Miriam Adelson. Now, Sheldon Adelson's deceased, but Miriam Adelson, who's taken on where her husband left off. Bernie Marcus, who also recently deceased, very clear about this. Michael Bloomberg, also very clear about this.
Haim
But these
Saban.
are Haim Saban. But these are a small minority of Jewish Americans. If you believe what these people say, what people like Haim Saban, Bernie Marcus, Michael Bloomberg, the Adelsons say, that's wildly out of sync with where most Jewish Americans are placing their priorities when they go vote or when they give money to candidates. But so these are a small minority of people. But to be clear, they have had an outsized influence through their money, through their political influence that they put to work.
I want to talk about we'll talk about white Christian nationalism and we'll talk about the Republicans because it leads directly in Iran. But there's another side that people don't follow this. And you mentioned the small group of people who openly say, hey, this is our issue. We want the world to know, and we will fund based on this issue. Miriam Adelson literally said that. He said, hey, if you can annex the West Bank, I'll give you 100 million. Hey, if you can keep control of the House, I'll give you another 100 million to Donald Trump. On the Democratic side, the person who openly said, I'm a one issue guy, that was Haim Saban. He said, I'm a one issue guy and it's Israel. And Haim Saban, yes, Saban, if you know the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, that guy, he has openly given money to Democrats. He said, I'm a one issue guy, Israel. And every year in Hollywood, folks, I've been following this. It's going to sound crazy. Every year in Hollywood, Haim Saban gets A-listers. I'm talking about like creme de la creme actors, Julia Roberts, Denzel Washington. Tell him, Eli, what Haim Saban does every year in Hollywood and what he raises money for, millions of dollars.
Friends of the IDF.
The IDF. I'm not
Yeah.
making this up.
Yeah.
In the United States of America, in Hollywood, every year, Haim Saban leads the A-lister of A-listers fundraiser, not for U.S. veterans, not for SNAP, not for USAID, for the IDF every single year. I don't know how this year has been going, but it used to be if you were in Hollywood, you had to attend that.
Now,
And which also then like spurs all the worst anti-Semitic conspiracies, right? But talk to us about the Democratic alignment. And I'm talking about specifically the Biden and Clinton era of Democrats when it comes to Israel and the Israel lobby.
yeah. I mean, I do want to briefly touch on Friends of the IDF because I think that's super interesting and important to look at. To be very clear, and I mean, I care about these legalistic distinctions because I think they're kind of interesting to look at. Technically, it is not giving money to the Israeli military. It's because that wouldn't actually be, I think, entirely legal. What it is you are by supporting Friends of the IDF, you are providing services and support
Oh, yeah.
outside of what the IDF provides, which would be like guns. But you can provide like PlayStations, which is actually something they provided, video games, and other forms of nice things for members of the IDF. And yeah, it became. What I find so interesting about it is that I think you kind of isolated this issue quite well with that it became normal that all of these A-listers attend this. It became he sort of made it part of the culture of LA and of Hollywood, where I don't think people were really thinking that much about what it was per se or is until maybe very recently. It was just, part of the social circuit was going to the Friends of the IDF fundraiser. Now, the largest donor, I believe, still to Friends of the IDF is a man whose name may be familiar. It's Larry Ellison,
No, shocking.
who now is through his company Oracle, one of the majority shareholders of TikTok, where I'm sure views that are pro-Palestinian and critical of Israel's actions in Gaza, Lebanon, and Iran will, I'm sure, be getting a fair shake now. So it's not a large group of people. It's not. It's a small group. I don't think Denzel Washington holds strong views about this. I don't think most of the people attending this held strong views. Haim Saban is powerful. Haim Saban has a lot of money. He gets all his friends to come to it. Now, you wanted to shift focus to the Democratic Party. I think probably the most interesting example in the Democratic Party of where this has led was the past presidential election.
Yep.
Because the polling that you're talking about, you said partly the past 2.5 years, that we're seeing this dramatic shift in public sentiments. And I always think, and you already pointed it out, it's worth repeating. This shift happens across pretty much every single group. It's not just with Democrats. It's not just Republicans. It's not just with white voters, black voters. It's not just with Jewish voters or Christian voters or evangelicals. It's a very consistent trend line. Now, different groups have maybe are more supportive of Israel or more critical than others, but the trend is the same. Support for Israel is diminishing. Support for the Palestinians is increasing. Now, the alarm bells were going off, to be very clear, 6 months before the general election. This was still when we had Joe Biden in the race, and there was real concern that the policies of the Biden administration in their hug Netanyahu closer strategy that they had implemented, which has always been the strategy for many years, the idea being that you can only influence Netanyahu and the Israelis by holding them very close and giving them pretty much everything they ask for, which is how the administration had handled the war in Gaza, was starting to create real problems within the Democratic Party and with the broader electorate. And what we saw was as those polling was coming out, by all accounts, the Biden and then the Harris campaigns went into denial mode. They
Yep.
said, "We've got this," and I base this off of my own good friend and interviews with him, Ahmed Khan, who was on the Biden Finance Committee. He was giving considerable amounts to the Biden campaign. He went to the White House. He tried to talk to them about it, especially to other major donors, and said, "Hey, first of all, it's wrong. We're killing kids, but second, you're going to lose the election on this." And he said the response was that they looked like he was,
Moron.
had two heads. They said, "Don't
Right.
worry, we got this,"
Yeah.
and he quit after that and pulled his support, and they proceeded to lose. And this was pretty obvious to a lot of us drawing closer to the election. And I don't want to say that Biden campaign or Harris campaign were stupid people, although I think they made some stupid decisions along the way. But I'm more inclined to believe that they were between a rock and a hard place. They were stuck between their base, who were increasingly critical of the positions that Biden had taken, and some of their top donors. And I've gone through and I've cataloged some of their top donors to both their both top bundlers as well as some of their top donors. These people were rabidly pro-Israel.
Huh.
And that was putting them in a tough spot because while that's a lot of money that these people were delivering, they still only delivered one vote each. And they were up against this groundswell of upset about what the Biden and Harris team had done. Now, I think it's really worth noting here that while it's easy to criticize where Trump has gone, obviously both with supporting Israel in ongoing really reoccupation of Gaza, now into Lebanon, Iran, series of catastrophes. Trump showed more compassion to Arab and Muslim voters, to Palestinian voters than the Harris campaign did. And I know that that strikes a hard nerve for a lot of people to hear that. But the truth of the matter is, they went to Michigan. Trump sent people to Michigan and said, we understand that this is unacceptable what's happening in Gaza. This is a failure that this is occurring. Now, they didn't deliver much better. I mean, I don't know. We don't know what a Harris administration would have done, but they were willing to say this is bad, which goes so much further than what Harris or Biden were prepared to do. And remember, at the convention, at the Democratic National Convention, you had that image of people walking into the convention hall with their hands over their ears as there were protesters outside reading off the names of Palestinian children killed in Gaza. There was the fact that the campaign refused to allow a Palestinian to speak, even when they were offered that they could decide who would be the Palestinian who would speak, and they would get to vet the remarks beforehand. They weren't willing to give those little pieces, sort of to acknowledge the basic humanity of the Palestinians, or the fact that there was a groundswell again of sentiment within the party that these were people, that this was something terrible that was happening in Gaza, and it was happening with the consistent flow of American weapons being made possible by the Biden-Harris administration.
No, and I've said this to many folks many times. Left Hook. I went to Michigan. I talked to these communities. That's exactly what happened. They said we literally told them that you're going to lose the election. Please listen to us. And the Democrats on the ground said, "Shut up," and they even kicked us out of meetings and groups just to silence debate over this question. And furthermore, Donald Trump sent Richard Grenell, and you know what they did? They met with us, and we said, "Okay, he's a piece of shit, but maybe he's transactional." Meanwhile, Democrats said, "F you." Like literally, they sent Bill Clinton to lecture people in Michigan whose families were being killed in Lebanon and Gaza. I mean, it's remarkable. And I'll never forget, in addition to the money, it's not just money, it's how the lobby influences culture and talking points and dehumanizes Muslims and Arabs. And I saw that with Biden. And that I remember there was an Isaac Chodner interview with Aaron David Miller in the New Yorker, where Aaron David Miller said, it's a different generation where I saw Bill Clinton weep when Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated. And Chodner then says, well, did he ever weep or cry over Arafat? And he goes, oh, that's a good point. He never did. In fact, when it comes to Biden and Clinton and that generation, they don't seem to have that type of empathy for Palestinian Arabs. And that's Aaron David Miller saying this. Then you see Biden. His trademark empathy for every group was completely missing for Palestinians, Eli. Like to him, It was ideological. He was a Zionist. He kept repeating that same old story about Golda Meir from the 1970s. Talk to us about how we're, in addition to dealing, between corporate Dems versus the base, how this is also a difference of ideology, where it seems like that older guard is stuck like Captain America in frozen friggin' ice when it comes to
Yeah,
this.
I think that's a great point, and, I think that transactional thing you pointed out is really, really interesting because, yes, on the one hand, you had Rick Grinnell coming in, and obviously it was a transactional thing they were doing or suggesting they would do, but and it's easy to say, "Well, yeah, okay," and then in the Democratic Party, it was worse because they were just this stuck in this ideological blinder. But, I mean, I can't emphasize this enough. That ideological blinder shut out their own political sensibilities, their own ability to win elections, their own ability to mobilize their own base. They were willing to take it that far. So that becomes a dangerous, dangerous thing. And I do worry that I'm not sure if the Democratic Party establishment has really absorbed that yet. This being wedded to the notion that you can't just, that we're still in the era of Golda Meir, we're still in the age of, the Israelis do everything they can to avoid civilian casualties. The narrative about the Israelis shoot and cry, that they hate the fact that they have to go kill these Arabs, and they investigate and regret every single death. Um, I think that there's also a generational element there that just doesn't hold water with a younger generation. And I must say with an older generation as well, because Israel's behavior has gotten worse. It has become more and more completely devoid of a moral calculus when it comes to the proportion of civilian casualties they are willing to tolerate in the pursuit of increasingly expansive strategic goals. At this point, Israel's basically said with Netanyahu that they want to be a very clear regional military hegemon, and how they define that is expansive. It's their ability to kill anyone, anywhere in the region. And I think it's worth questioning, how does that interact with American interests? Does that create a stable Middle East? Does that create any sort of a balance that we can live with? How does that work with, now we've had successive administrations, Obama and Trump and Biden and Trump again, all alluding to the fact they want to pivot from the Middle East toward East Asia and toward managing the rise of China. This is the singular thing that will prevent that from happening. So it runs counter to sort of the strategic rationale of successive administrations now.
It,
Now,
Go
sorry,
ahead.
go
Go
ahead.
ahead. No, go ahead. Yeah, I said it hurts America. It hurts both parties. It hurts definitely the Democrats, and we see it happening in Israel. Excuse me, Iran right now. Before we get to Iran, though, and just to be fair, we talked about the Democrats. I want to talk about Republicans because
Mhm.
you mentioned another name, Miriam Adelson. Miriam Adelson, much like Haim Saban, one issue. Miriam Adelson, the widow of Sheldon Adelson. When I went to Israel and the settlements in the West Bank openly, they're like, yep, the Adelsons have invested in this illegal settlement. And the reason why they invested in this illegal settlement was once they were given a surety by us that we would be permanent. I'm talking about the settlement of Ariel. And then when I toured around Ariel, I saw a big name of a multi-million dollar sports complex. Sports complex was named after Pastor Hagee, a white Christian nationalist. And then I saw buildings and buildings that were named after the Milken brothers. Oh, Americans. So these are illegal settlements in the West Bank that have literally the names, folks, of Americans, American Christian nationalists, American Jews, and funded by Miriam Adelson. But now, speaking about the money that corrupts both sides, Miriam Adelson gave more than $100 million to Donald Trump. And she openly said, based on the reporting, I'm giving you this money if you promise to annex the West Bank. He said, sure. Talk to us about how this money is influencing the Trump administration.
So, I mean, actually, what she said, which I think is interesting, is that we've based our estimates. That $100 million number, I think, was probably based off of recorded campaign contributions. But it was always assumed that the Adelsons, as well as others, give considerable amounts of dark money. And she said it was 250 million for the last election.
Wow.
And so yeah, it's a lot of money that she's been throwing in, and I would say if you factor that in plus the known disclosed contributions in previous cycles, since Citizens United, that would probably mean they've given somewhere in the vicinity or over $1 billion into Republican broadly Republican campaigns, not just presidential down ticket as well. I think it's really important when we talk about the influence of their money. to look back. Most people don't forget. Most people forget uh, what positions Donald Trump was taking when he was a primary candidate in 2015 and 2016. And he really stood out on the debate stage because he was the only candidate who said that he would not commit to withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal. He was the only candidate who said his primary beef with the Iran nuclear deal was that Iran was buying too many Airbus planes and parts and not enough Boeing. He was the only candidate who said that he thought it was actually harmful to get up there and say that he was inherently going to side with the Israelis in the peace in some notion of a peace process negotiation, and that he thought the United States needed to step back and be more of a neutral arbiter. And he got raked over the coals for these positions. He also was the only one willing to say the Iraq War was a mistake. I guess Rand Paul was willing to say that too. Um, so these were considered to be like heretic positions that you couldn't have within the Republican Party. And this is something we should touch on later, but he did really well across a variety of groups within the Republican Party, including some that we were told would be vehemently opposed to this, like Christian evangelicals. They were okay with this, or at least they would tolerate it from him. And he won the nomination with these positions. He didn't change them until right when he was about to clinch the nomination. He had it in the bag. And it's very clear that he, at that point, had to turn his attention to the general election. Not just having positions that would win the general election, but he had a more immediate concern, which is that once you've clinched the nomination, you have an oh shit problem, which is that you can kind of have run a shoestring grassroots thing as you hopscotch from one state to another, heading into Super Tuesday when you got to raise a little more money. But when you go into the general election, you have to raise $1 billion. Both parties. And you got to do it pretty quickly. So you're going to need to lock down your mega donors. And you see this flurry of activity where he's talking with, you got Paul Singer, who financed what was initially the Steele report, the initial research into that. So he was basically a never Trumper. And you have Bernie Marcus saying, I wish this guy had a better, prove his tone about Trump. And you have the Adelsons saying that, we're not entirely comfortable with what he's saying about Israel. And they start talking. And it's very clear, you get these reports that, Sheldon Adelson comes out and says, yeah, we had a good meeting in Las Vegas, and he's going to be really pro-Israel. And Donald Trump comes out of this, and everything changes. And he starts making these commitments about what he was going to do in his first term, which are exactly what he did in his first term. He got out of the Iran nuclear deal.
Disaster.
Yeah, he greenlit, Israel's, expansion and control over the Golan Heights.
Disaster.
He moved the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
Disaster.
Well, and there was one problem with that, which is this comes back to the role of the mega donors. That it's really easy with the stroke of a pen to move the embassy, right? You move it, now it's the consulate in Jerusalem, is now the embassy, whatever. But how do you prevent the next president from moving it back? And they were like, well, what can we do? And it's like, well, the ambassador has this really nice house in Tel Aviv. Beautiful home on right overlooks the ocean. They're like, we got to sell this thing to make it so you can't move back. And we're going to need to sell it to somebody who's not going to sell it back to the U.S. government. So they sold it to the Adelsons.
Wow.
Who bought it for, it was the largest property transaction, I think, maybe in at that point in Tel Aviv's history.
Was this David Friedman, the U.S. ambassador to Israel?
Yeah, I believe it was.
Wow. So the U.S. ambassador to Israel sold that house to the Adelsons. And by the way, David Friedman was a freak, right-wing, pro-settler psycho who was Donald Trump's first ambassador to Israel, who has now been replaced by Christian nationalist freak Mike Huckabee, for those keeping receipts.
And now, I'm going to shift sort of the closing scenes of Trump first term, which is incidentally where we open our book with this anecdote, which is that people weren't paying that much attention it was in December before January 6th, around Christmas, right between Christmas and New Year's, end of Trump's term. He's already lost, according to some people. And he, out of nowhere, there's this news that Jonathan Pollard, his parole restrictions have been lifted. He's a spy, an Israeli spy. He was convicted in the 1980s. Huge intelligence breach. And to be clear, he didn't just do this out of ideological, desire to help Israel. He sold U.S. secrets very sensitive secrets, some of which actually were in turn traded by the Israelis to the Soviet Union. Stuff like, American spy satellite capabilities. And every time the Israelis had long wanted to get a pardon or to get him, some sort of change in his sentence. And every time that they started to get some traction, the entire U.S. national security apparatus, anybody who had been around in that time period who was above a certain level of security clearance, would go absolutely berserk and say, "Absolutely not. This guy is lucky he didn't get the death penalty."
Traitor.
He's and yeah, so, he serves out his sentence. He has parole. He has a parole restriction, which prohibited his ability to travel. And everyone knew he wanted to emigrate, make aliyah to Israel. And one of the arguments that was made is, no, he shouldn't be given his passport back. He shouldn't be allowed to travel because he's going to get a hero's welcome if he goes back to Israel, and it's inappropriate. And in the closing days of Trump's first term, they gave him his passport, lifted those parole restrictions, and I remember that there were these images of him at Newark Airport. And he's getting on. It was during COVID. I don't even know if there were direct flights from the United States to Israel at that time. And he's getting on a private jet. And I remember I was looking at these photos, and I remember thinking, oh my God, I know that plane. I know that paint job. The Adelsons have a fleet of planes that they use for their high rollers. They own casinos. They lease it to their casinos to use. And it was one of the Adelsons' private 737s. So here you have, at the end of Trump's term, which was clouded by these claims of foreign influence over him, largely fixated on, what were largely, unproven claims about his ties to Russia. Here you have the Republican Party's biggest donor, President Trump's biggest donor, providing the airplane to fly a convicted spy out of the country to Israel, where, sure enough, he gets a hero's welcome on the tarmac where Benjamin Netanyahu greets him. And as if that wasn't spiking the football enough to be clear about what's going on, Miriam Adelson writes an op-ed in the next day or two that she publishes in the newspaper they own in Israel called Israel Hayom. And in this, she says,
Well, can you just tell people it's that free newspaper
it's
that
that
is
free
a
newspaper.
right-wing newspaper produced by the Adelsons that they literally just use their money to literally give to everyone. It's the number one newspaper, free to everyone, right-wing propaganda.
Exactly. And she writes that, that in Israel they should be, welcoming Pollard home for, as like a soldier gone abroad, and so he can have his retirement. And then she says, and to our American friends, this is an incident best forgotten. She's like, memory hole the whole thing. You didn't see any of this.
Heck, well, can you remind us? Tucker Carlson saw it, and he's the one who brought it up. I think it should have been corporate media that brings it up. It should have been the Democrats. But can you remind everyone who Pollard was hanging out with in Israel, the American white Christian
Well, yeah, I
nationalist?
mean, so what's amazing, yeah, is in Trump's second term with Mike Huckabee as the new ambassador. He's actually they invite Pollard to the U.S. embassy in Jerusalem, which supposedly the CIA station chief was apoplectic about. He was like, this is insane. First of all, it's inappropriate that you're even inviting him for anything. Second, you're inviting him into a secure government facility. Isn't that how we got in this mess with this guy to start with? What is he doing in the building? Um, so yeah, I mean, it's very clear. And obviously, Mike Huckabee and the Adelsons were very, very close. Huckabee seems to, when push comes to shove, when asked about what U.S. policy in the region should be, he usually defers to it being as whatever's good for Israel.
Yep.
Again, just in crazy position for a U.S. ambassador to be taking.
And Pollard, by the way, folks, the traitor, again, U.S. spy traitor who sold sensitive U.S. secrets to Israel, finally got sent to Israel thanks to Donald Trump and Miriam Adelson. Man, she's got a lot for her $250 million. Pollard now is openly meeting with Mike Huckabee, has no problem dining with Pollard. And Pollard now has openly told American Jews in America to do what he did. He's openly telling them, do what I did. Sell your secrets for Israel. And if that doesn't infuriate you, I don't know what else will. But speaking of, I want to be fair because it's not just Trump. It's not just the white Christian nationalists, who, by the way, folks, the largest Zionist group in America is not a Jewish group. It's Christians United for Israel, the white evangelical group led by Pastor Hagee. It's very important. That's Netanyahu's base. And also some of these big donors and legacy groups like ADL and Greenlight and others. Majority of American Jews increasingly not down with this right-wing government. But I digress. Miriam Adelson, a couple months ago, Eli, I don't know if you paid attention to this, but I brought this up in the Left Hook. She does a conference in New York. She usually does a conference in Israel. And she invites, this is the same Miriam Adelson, folks, if you've been paying attention. Miriam Adelson invites Hillary Clinton, who was the 2016 Democratic nominee for president. I'm assuming you know of this. If you don't, I'll fill it in. But can you tell people if Clinton accepted and what she said?
I know she accepted. I was skimming my head what she said. I remember it seemed wildly inappropriate that
Uh,
she was going on the
oh,
stage with the woman who had financed taking her down politically.
so she first of all
Yeah,
literally accepts
yeah.
taking money from a woman who's given more than $250 million to Donald Trump, literally is committed for Republicans to take the House. I just want people to follow me. It's just happened in September. Hillary Clinton accepts that Miriam Adelson's invitation in New York. Hillary Clinton comes in New York, and this is before Larry Ellison takes over TikTok, repeats the Israeli
Yep.
propaganda that the main reason why the youths are radicalized against Israel isn't because of the genocide. It's because of the TikTok.
Yeah.
She says it's the TikTok that has gotten these kids, and then connect the dots. Eli, tell them who
Well,
took over TikTok and why.
I mean, I think that's very consistent with, other people like Van Jones who got in trouble for saying the exact same thing. There's this much like you can't cling forever to the security blanket of the two-state solution. I think that there's also this element of clinging to some notion that the seeping away of pro-Israel sentiments has something to do with a manipulation of social media. Now, obviously, Larry Ellison taking an ownership share in TikTok is problematic. That's something that Benjamin Netanyahu seems to be heralding as a victory already when he came and spoke to social media influencers here in New York during the UN General Assembly last September, where he said, TikTok is number one. We have a good friend Elon over at X, where he's very clear that the goal here is to manipulate these platforms. But when you hear about, well, what is it that these platforms are doing that is so harmful? Well, I think Van Jones actually kind of laid it out more succinctly than anyone else, where he said, when I open up my TikTok feed, all I see is,
Dead
dead
Gaza
Gaza
baby.
baby, dead Gaza baby, Diddy, dead Gaza baby, dead Gaza baby. Well, maybe it's all made up, or maybe it's that there's a lot of dead kids in Gaza. And you know what? People don't like that across pretty much every single group. It just doesn't play well. And you can complain about the platform that's delivering that to people, and your inability to influence it to not show dead babies. But maybe the problem is that there are dead babies. And
No, that's silly. That's anti-Semitic, Eli. The youths just got manipulated by the algorithm. They're too
the youths are
stupid.
getting into this radical thing where it like upsets them when they're shown dead babies.
Again and again for 2 years. And you mentioned, this is Eli Clifton, folks, co-founder of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, also the author of this excellent article in The Nation, How the Israeli Tail Wags the American Dog. And his book is coming out by Simon & Schuster in the summer. Can't wait to read it. America in the Grip of a Foreign Power, Israel's Lobby, an unflinching expose of Israel's lobby showing how its outsized influence and this is key, works against our national interests and threatens our freedom. Now, to that point, many of us have been saying this. And in the past 2 weeks, we have an amazing example. Oh, this disastrous war with Iran, where, folks, by the way, if you've been paying attention, not going so well. And according to the reportings, both Times of Israel, New York Times, and Washington Post, it repeatedly says, and also Marco Rubio's own words, there was no imminent threat. Israel, specifically Benjamin Netanyahu, once he realized that there were some sober voices coming in and trying to veer Donald Trump away from the war, comes in, both bullies and flatters. Lindsey Graham does the same. White Christian nationalists like Kexet do the same. Tucker comes in. Donald Trump ignores Tucker. They say, listen, listen, listen. Israel's going to do this regardless. So you better have our back. And also, they'll love you for it. You're going to do something that no one else did. You're going to take out the Ayatollah. It'll be awesome. Shock and awe. He goes, that's right. It'll be me. It'll be awesome. And then according to the reporting, they used Venezuela as a comparison and said, look how easy Venezuela was. And then the quote was, we're on a roll, baby. Talk to us about how pro-Israel allies and groups, because it's not just Netanyahu, it's also the white Christian nationalists, got us into this horrific war against our own interests, but to help Israel.
Well, I think it's really important to focus on people focus a little too much, I think, on the quote from Marco Rubio. Focus a little too much on the second part of it, where he says, "So we decided we were going to preempt this problem." But the first part of what he said was unusually honest, more honest than really most American policymakers, I mean, particularly from the Democratic Party, have been. Where he said, you know, Israel is gonna do this. And when they do this, it's going to create blowback for the United States.
Yep.
Our bases in the region are going to get hit, and we don't think that we can control what Israel does here. And I think he was being entirely honest. And he deserves a lot of credit for that. Now, his diagnosis of what to do about that problem was crazy. But the fact that he was willing to state that problem is huge. It means that we have this client state, which often is referred to as an ally, although there are no treaty obligations. It's not a formal ally in that sense. Um, is engaged or was about to engage in an act of war that was going to cause an immediate national security problem for the United States. And we apparently did not have the ability to get them to stop, even though they are our largest recipient of foreign aid. And remember, the whole hug Bibi strategy, that's supposed to give us influence. Apparently, we had none. Our only choice was whether we were going to wait to get hit as a result of Israel's actions, or whether we were going to somehow try to get ahead of it. Although I'm not convinced we got that much ahead of it, because we are currently getting hit all over the region. The Strait of Hormuz is closed. Global oil prices are about to go skyrocketing. And it is unclear how we are going to get out of this situation, because this act of military dominance that was supposed to very quickly change the regime in Iran, it was supposed to happen in a relatively low cost manner for the United States and for the region, is not happening. And this is where I come to. This was not in line with any American interests. What it was in line with was Israel's interest and Netanyahu's interest in maintaining a state of perpetual war, expanding the areas in the region in which Israel could act, sort of freely to kill whoever they want. But this certainly did not benefit the United States. It did not benefit Saudi Arabia. It did not benefit the United Arab Emirates. It has not benefited Qatar. It has not benefited Bahrain, Kuwait, Iraq. Look across the region. No, none of these countries that the United States claims to have good relations with are benefiting in a significant manner from this. And again, American consumers are about to be hurt very, very badly when they want to fill up their cars at the gas pump.
But Israel believes that this helps them in the long term. I had Treat on, and I think his framing on Sunday was really good. He goes, permanent insecurity for the region leads to total security for Israel. It's a diabolical way of looking at the world, but that's the strategy. And if I've gone, you've gone, I think I've gone several times. You listen to these folks, that they're perpetually just obsessed with security, 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 right? So they're perfectly fine with a completely unstable, degraded Middle East with potential radical groups, and they're like, that's fine. You guys could just live as barbarians, and there could be extremists here and there, but we're going to make sure that there's no chance that you have any semblance of a functional a nation state, because a functional nation state means that you could, in some way, shape, or form, oppose us in our regional hegemony. So we want total insecurity for Syria, for Lebanon, for the Palestinians, the West Bank and Gaza, now for Iran, because that will lead to our long-term security, which to me is also madness, Eli, because they fail to see the immense blowback that will cause. And I think it's hubris and arrogance and madness that leads them to think that they will somehow be secure. You're seeing the Dubai airport on fire. You're now seeing mass displacement of Lebanese. I don't know if you saw the latest news today. Israel said that these Lebanese, over 750,000 people who they've displaced, they just told them, you're not coming back. So that's, folks, what they're doing to Gaza. They're now taking over Lebanon. And literally the world is burning. To which then I say, will any American or Democratic leadership stand up and say enough? And if they don't say enough now, when will they say enough? Because I saw Chuck Schumer and Jeffries' response. I'm sure you did as well. Eli, to me, it seemed like they were more pissed off they weren't invited.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like they It was a combination, it seems like within the establishment Democratic Party of that they think it would have been nice if Trump had come to Congress first to ask permission, but they mostly would just kinda like it's more of a procedural thing, and these guys like to do things by the book, well, at least when it's a Republican, they think that would be nice. Um, and a matter of saying that, well, they just wish he would be doing it better
Go
somehow,
look at their statements, folks, not making
somehow.
this up.
Which is, first of all, that's a really disingenuous criticism to make because, credit where credit is due. Like, if you're gonna do this, I don't know, like, can you come up with a better plan? I'm not saying it's a good plan. I'm not saying it's gonna work, but the idea that these guys have a better plan, like, come on, this is a terrible idea. There is no better plan. This is what it looks like. It's not pretty. There is no follow up for the fact that it plan hasn't gone as planned. This wasn't going to work, and a lot of people were saying so. And the idea that this is the best that the Democratic Party can come up with is to say, well, on procedural grounds, we kind of wish it could have been done a little differently. And, much like, the people who came in as critics of the Iraq war after it had started, by then saying, sort of Monday morning quarterbacking it and saying, well, maybe if we hadn't done debathification, that was a dumb thing to have done. Whose idea was that? Um, at a certain point, you're unwilling to engage with the broader problem here, which is that Israel just dragged the United States into a war, that there is no strategic rationale for the United States being it.
Uh,
And
Go ahead.
the Secretary of State said so.
And all the reporting corresponds to what the Secretary of State openly said. Um, what about those Democrats who think that they can win in 2028? Like, oh, I don't know, Josh Shapiro and others, Elisa Slotkin and others who are Hakeem Jeffries, who everything we've just said so far, as of right now, they're still taking money from APEC, bundling the money, laundering it through anodyne projects, and supporting Democrats in these upcoming races, such as the primary races in Illinois, or setting themselves up for a presidential run in 2028, where Josh Shapiro says, well, Gavin Newsom was wrong about using the word apartheid, and they're still parroting pro-Israel talking points. I think they're blind, Eli. I think they've missed it. The latest poll just came out today. I didn't need to see that poll. But they still think business as usual, rah, 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 pro-Israel. Chuck Schumer hugged Netanyahu last summer, folks. He hasn't hugged Mamdani. He hugged Netanyahu last summer. I'm sure you heard his comment last month in February. My main job as Senate minority leader is to make sure Israel is funded. That was last February, month ago, folks. Um, they still think they could do business as usual. I think they got another thing coming. Your prediction.
I think they are playing with fire once again, politically as well as, strategically and ethically and morally. Um, they are playing with fire for a couple reasons. One, they are leaving a lot of space open for, primary challengers within the party who say that, enough is enough. We're ready to challenge, these establishment folks on, what has become a populist issue. That's their best case scenario. Because if that doesn't happen, there's another party out there that's probably making more progress on evolving on this issue than the Democratic Party has. When we look out there and say, who are really the most, consistent voices about criticizing, the U.S. Israel relationship, about speaking to the humanity of Palestinians, about saying that this is a waste, both in terms of our own resources, but also something that's maybe just ethically kind of wrong what we're doing. It's people like Marjorie Taylor Greene. It's people like Tucker Carlson. It's people like Thomas Massey. And they have become very consistent on this. And this is something that I think really does need more scrutiny, which is that Christian evangelicals have consistently voted for people like Thomas Massey and people like Rand Paul and when Marjorie Taylor Greene was getting elected. And their positions might not line up with where Christian evangelicals are, or have been. But it's possible that much like Jewish voters, this is a relatively low salience issue for Christian evangelicals. Or there's another possibility, which I think Tucker Carlson taps into, which is that Christian evangelicals, while they might believe in end times theology, there are some other things that they believe in as well. such as that they don't like seeing Christians getting killed, as they have been in the West Bank and in Lebanon and in Gaza. They don't like the idea of their taxpayer dollars going to a country that has put a lot of money and resources and effort via people like the Adelsons, as well as directly from the Israeli government, into trying to cultivate Christian evangelicals and Christian Zionists as allies. But these people are not stupid. And I think that, especially on the left, we often have sort of this wooden notion of who Christian evangelicals are. And this notion that, oh, well, they just prioritize Israel. And they want to have the end times come about. But it's very clear in polling that they are also becoming less and less wedded to that idea of Israel right or wrong, and that they are concerned and that they do not like seeing Israel mistreatment of Christians in the region. So I think that there's something going on there on the right that we should pay attention to, because those are a lot of voters. There is a reason that Israel and its supporters have really invested heavily in trying to cultivate Christian evangelicals, because that is a large voting bloc. Jewish Americans, even if we did all vote pro-Israel, we're not really a swing state number in maybe any
That's
state
not
except like
Netanyahu's
Florida.
base. That's
Yeah,
not Netanyahu's base.
yeah, it's just not. It's just not the numbers. And I'm less and less convinced that I think that one of the big lies of the lobby is that Jewish voters vote on Israel. But there's another lie they like to tell, which is that Christian evangelicals vote down the line on Israel. And we're starting to see cracks in that. This is not a monolith when we talk about Christian evangelical voters. And I think when you watch somebody like Tucker Carlson and the way he talks about, the humanity of Palestinians, the fact that this is wrong, and he really does spend quite a lot of time talking about how Israel mistreats Christians or does not distinguish between Palestinian Muslims and Palestinian Christians.
Uh, don't listen to me. Listen to Eli. I've been warning for 2 years. I will warn again. Democrats are making a mistake. By being wedded to Israel, they have ceded the ground to Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Thomas Massie, Marjorie Taylor Greene, that have moved to the left of the Democratic establishment when it comes to critique of Israel. I cannot tell you, Eli, it kills me. I am on like a one-man de-radicalization project, but it's over. I've lost. I've conceded that I've lost. How many educated, smart, intelligent people I now openly talk to who say that if Tucker Carlson runs in 2028 and 2032, yes, he's a piece of crap, but he's taken it to the Israel lobby. He's taken it to MAGA. I'll vote for him. Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's terrible. But did you see what she just said right now against pedophiles and against the Epstein file and Trump and Israel? I'll vote for her. Candace Owens, I thought she was crazy, but did you see what she just said? And I always tell them, you get your information in 3 to 5 minute WhatsApp clips. Go look at the rest of the interview where they say like horrible racist stuff. They're like, they don't have time for that. But I'm telling you, folks, you all laugh at me. You're not paying attention. They have moved further to the left than the Democratic establishment on this issue. They know the pulse of young generations. They look at the poll numbers. They are more bold and blunt when it comes to criticizing Israel and empathizing with Palestinians, despite being white nationalists and also Islamophobes. Yes, both things can be true at the same time, than the Democratic establishment. If you think it won't work, you're not paying attention. I'm talking about independents, and so many disgruntled Democrats are like, okay, if they'll shake shit up, I'll vote for them. Does that sound familiar? 2016, Donald Trump. Does that sound familiar? AOC. Does that sound familiar? Mamdani. And the Democratic leadership is taking this issue for granted. I'm telling you, Tucker, Marjorie are running with this, man. And they're also running, I'll give you another warning, AI. Steve Bannon and Tucker and Marjorie Taylor Greene are speaking more critically of AI than the Democratic leaders who are getting paid by the AI billionaires. They see the next 2 years. They're looking at this. And I'm telling you, you take this for granted. Do not be surprised. Tucker Carlson, presidential candidate 2028, 2032. Eli, if I'm wrong, you tell me.
No, I think you're spot on. And one thing that also pains me in this is that the excuse that will be made is that when Tucker Carlson or MTG or whoever it is, proves that this is indeed a populist unifying issue, to say that actually Palestinians are people and that we don't like the idea of our tax dollars being used to murder them. Whether you just don't like it as a use of cost per bullet, or if your issue is that you don't like being morally culpable in that. And I think that they do a good job of encompassing both of those positions. Um, people are going to say, well, that's just because they just managed to mobilize the support of anti-Semites.
Yep.
And whether or not these people hold anti-Semitic views or not, the reason that they will have gotten that support is not because they are anti-Semites or they are not. It is because they will have expressed the populist sentiment that this is wrong.
That's the key thing right there. That's it. And I've heard that, folks. I'm telling you, I said it in 2024. I said Gaza, and they said, shut up. And I said, I'm trying to help you. You have to pay attention to this. They said, shut your mouth. It's because of you we lost. I'm like, I did everything I could to get Kamala Harris to win. You saw it. But this is where people are, and this is where people are right now. They're saying something. They're saying something that no other person is saying. Okay, everyone's corrupt. Everyone's a racist. Everyone sucks. Might as well tip our hat to Tucker. At least he's against forever wars. He'll make sure Palestinians and Muslims aren't killed. MAGA hates him, and he'll go against AI. And he likes traditional values and men, and I'm a man. I like traditional values in God as well. You're not paying attention. But hopefully you pay attention to Eli. Eli, I kept you a bit longer, but it's been fantastic. There's 2,000 people watching. This is Eli Clifton. He has a fantastic new book coming out in the summer. I'm going to ask him to shamelessly send me an advance copy. It's called America in the Grip of a Foreign Power, Israel's Lobby, co-written by Eli and Ian Lustig. I'm going to put the link right here, and I'm going to link to it when this is up later on today for those who missed this conversation. And also, Eli has, if you will, a sneak preview of that book in a column in The Nation that just came out 4 days ago, How the Israeli Tail Wags the American Dog. Eli is Jewish American. He is not anti-Semitic. He brought in all the facts and the data. And folks, we're looking at it, right? We're looking at it right now. Like, what other excuse do you have for Hakeem Jeffries to take money from AIPAC? You're literally looking at AIPAC openly gloat as they're trying to destroy Kat Abu Ghazaleh. You're literally seeing Donald Trump go into a war that is against American interests, and you see the same characters who, are like, well, this helps Israel, but does it help America? No, it doesn't. And if anyone says anything, you get smeared as anti-Semitic, but it's not working anymore, Eli, which is also bad because they've misused anti-Semitism so much that they're missing the anti-Semitism that is actually flourishing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And to be clear, all of this will reinforce the worst anti-Semitic tropes and biases in this country. It's already happening. To get a sense of just how bad it will be, just go listen to what Jonathan Greenblatt has to say, because he's actively trying to pump it up, it seems. Or if he's not trying, that's the effect of what he's doing. It's really dangerous. This is absolutely going to blow back in this country in the form of heightened anti-Semitism. It is just one of the consequences and prices that I'm afraid will be paid by this, dreadful war that we're now seeing, extending into Iran. And to be clear, it did not start with that.
Yeah, and it's going to hurt civilians, Jews, Muslims, Arabs,
Absolutely.
and Americans. Everyone's going to be a target, folks. Eli, shamelessly promote yourself.
I'm Eli Clifton with the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Please take a look at my column in The Nation that the Wajahat so gratefully put forward. Check it out, and please pre-order my book, or do buy it when it comes out, when you see it at your local bookstore. Israel's Lobby: America in the Grip of a Foreign Power.
If you like this conversation, I have another awesome banger of a conversation. I have Professor of Political Science from University of Chicago, specializing in security affairs, Robert Pape, excuse me. Robert Pape has done fantastic work, fantastic research, and he's going to talk about the unexpected consequences of this disastrous war in Iran and what to expect both regionally and at home. More and more people are now finally paying attention to him. He'll be on at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. That'll be really good. I strongly recommend people listen to that. Thanks, Eli. Take care. And everyone else, please subscribe to The Left Hook. If you aren't a subscriber, everything's free. And if you can, well, I got 800 kids. I have a special on. It's theleftook.substack.com/special. 25% off forever. Eli, is such a good deal. It's $3.75 a month. Forever. And
Practically free.
practically free. And if you don't have the money, it is free. But if you have a few dollars and you like this conversation, please become a paid subscriber. It really, really, folks, goes a long way because I'm completely independent. And buy Eli's book. And this, for the 2,000 people, I'm so happy, 2,000 people for this nerdy conversation who are joining us a bit late. This will be up later on my Substack, and I'm going to link to Eli's article and book. Thank you all for watching. Be kind, be informed, and please, oh, please don't be a fascist. Take care, Eli.
Thanks for having me.